In this AFEx talk, myself and two other Indigenous colleagues are going to share short personal stories on our experiences with Indigenous erasure in fire ecology. We are part of a larger team looking to create respectful narratives on research and publishing in this field. We presented the larger project in a special session yesterday, and you'll see our collective work being published in the next few months. My name is Amy Christensen. I also use my Cookum's name Cardinal. My family is Métis. I'm from a long line of trappers and medicine women in the boreal forest and buffalo hunters on the plains. It is very strange to be an Indigenous person from a nation and territory that is extensively researched like the boreal, and also trying to be a researcher myself. Oftentimes, I'm just going through the motions of my day job, and I'll suddenly come across a statement or article that stops me cold and makes it hard to focus or work for days. I often wonder if the authors realize the huge impact their writings can have on Indigenous peoples. We don't only have to defend our science, but also ourselves as people and our knowledge systems and our way of life. I'm always jealous of researchers who just get to do science. Fire ecology is an especially hard field of study. Decades of research have completely excluded Indigenous peoples. There's been two articles that were especially hurtful during my career. One was by Ellis et al. In 2021, which referred to my family's territory as wild woodlands, which, based on their definition, is the complete absence of human populations and intensive land use. After raising this concern with the authors, it seems they just meant there was a lack of data, which led to this classification. But an oversight like this can be harmful in labeling. The other was by Bell, which was reprinted in the Journal of Fire Ecology in 2012. The reprint contained numerous statements that I personally consider racist and do not add any contributions to his discoveries on fire ecologies. I put discoveries in quotation marks because our nations have stories of educating Western science with our knowledge, who then steal that knowledge for their own career advancement. We can also say this is the language of time, but we don't need to reprint it. For example, one thing he says is that Indigenous peoples don't do anything except by necessity. For myself, I don't really see the contribution to fire ecology in that statement. We have responsibility as the current and future generation of scientists. We need to call out racist ideologies and correct it in both our work and others. Another point to mention is how much additional labor this calling out can create for Indigenous peoples. Every time we raise a concern or point out something that is wrong, we are asked to contribute to educating or fixing it. This then takes away from our own time to pursue things that matter to us and our nations. The threat of AI also looms over us as Indigenous peoples, where our relationships with our human and non-human relatives will be further diminished as we turn to technology for answers it can't give us.
I'm Pit River and Mountain Maidu, enrolled with the Hat Creek Band of the Pit River Tribe. I'm here today because my ancestors are survivors of attempted genocide and removal of tribal people from the landscape. Indigenous erasure affects all of Indigenous people's lives, including mine and my children's. So it's really hard to know where to start with the story. In the field of fire ecology, my story started with a family of firefighters, but also with a family of basket weavers. It led me to be really interested in cultural plants and using fire to benefit all the different ways my family, practices our culture on the landscape. When I started working for a non-tribal agency, I felt like I was constantly trying to speak up and educate different people about where the other part of the story wasn't being told about cultural burning and human fire on the landscape. So for me, Indigenous erasure, it's in all aspects of fire ecology, from the maps we use, where it has racist terms or non-Indigenous names for different ancestral homelands of the tribes. That stuff just, is right in our faces, being tribal fire practitioners that interact every day with fire agencies that don't understand our cultures and our histories. Indigenous erasure is also within the universities where I studied. When I was studying fire ecology, a lot of students used past tense when they would talk about different tribes. And a lot of times I heard a lot of people that went on to work in natural resources speak as if cultural burning was a past practice that was not applicable to today. When non-tribal scientists and managers speak on behalf of tribes without asking them to speak for themselves or to participate in those types of papers or presentations, that is Indigenous erasure. Indigenous erasure includes citing papers that were written by anthropologists during a time when they had no understanding and didn't actually communicate with the tribes themselves. They were outsiders looking in, trying to describe what they thought was a dying race. The reality was that they had no real perspective of the actual culture from an outside looking in perspective. And so a lot of those papers are flawed and use racist terms and demeaning terms about our tribes.
Hi, my name is Frank Kanawha Lake. I'm of mixed Indigenous, North American Indigenous, and European descent, but I affiliate and identify more with Northwest California tribes, particularly being a Karuk descendant and having half-siblings and family that are Yurok. As a tribal person from this area, I want to talk about some of the ways that Indigenous erasure happens in relation to fire ecology. One of the main important things for me that I want to emphasize is looking historically at what are the factors of fire suppression, and particularly the way that fire ecology has been framed. In many of our areas, men were traditionally trained, and still are, on mountain peaks. Many of these high mountain peaks are called medicine or fireplaces, and those were places that men were taught by elder men about how to make medicine in relation to lightning storms and weather, as well as to make medicine for world renewal and other practices. These areas were often some of the first places that fire lookouts were put on, and these fire lookouts were then there to suppress both lightning and indigenous ignitions across the landscape. That denied access to these sacred places, but also was a form of erasure by often removing the very rocks and artifacts that are there as part of those fire altars in the foundation of those fire lookouts. So as those lookouts are taken down and we look and move toward more remote sensing capacity, we should have a reconciliation about what was the happening of those places, at those medicine places or sacred places in regards to tribal fire knowledge in relation with lightning and fire medicine. Also to look at the ways that we can restore and repatriate those sacred medicine places in relation to tribal fire knowledge and those medicine places and sacred sites. Another aspect that I want to talk about and address has to do with the notion of natural fire regimes. Many places across this landscape were considered lightning influenced, and they are, but also there's a significant important part of the indigenous contribution to these fire regimes, both looking at increased frequency and the seasonality. Many of the fire scar samples that we have and we get talk about and document that cultural fire history, and those are important legacies of understanding indigenous ecologies of that. As fire lines are constructed, both through dozers and other processes, hazard trees are felled, stumps are burned out, and things like that, all these fire suppression and contingency line things through dozer and burnouts lead to eventual and other forms of erasure, removing that history of indigenous fire use on that landscape. When we lose those for high severity fires through dozer line construction and other processes during fire suppression activities, we lose the ability to teach our next generation. We have to be able to consult our tribal colleagues and elders and practitioners, how we use fire historically as cultural communities, and how we begin to use that in partnership to move forward. Many of these places are in the legacy of the vegetation, and the trees, the composition, whether it's the shrubs, the artifacts, are all legacies of indigenous stewardship that we can learn to live with fire to recognize and prevent the erasure of indigenous ecologies as part of fire ecology and teachings. Thank you.